On April 2nd, everything changed. President Trump unleashed the biggest tariff strike in American history, targeting China with full force. He stood in front of cameras and promised nothing short of domination. But then, within just 3 weeks, reality hit hard. Ford announced a halt in production. Boeing raised alarms about national security threats. And across the country, America's supply chains started to fall apart, all without a single missile being fired or a battle fought. Why did this happen? Because China didn't meet force with force. It didn't issue threats. Instead, it quietly used something far more powerful: rare earth minerals. These are the invisible engines behind modern life, powering everything from your iPhone to advanced fighter jets like the F-35. And when China cut off these critical materials, America found itself in a fight it couldn't win. Suddenly, the same president who promised to crush China was smiling on television, trying to negotiate, practically begging for a deal. What was sold as a victory turned out to be a humiliating retreat, and the true cost, that was just beginning to unfold. It all started officially on April 2nd, 2025, when Trump declared economic war, rolling out sweeping tariffs aimed directly at Beijing, insisting this would bring China to its knees. But by June, the tough talk had shifted. On Truth Social, Trump posted about a very good conversation with President Xi, hoping to restart the rare earth shipments that America desperately needed. Because without China's rare earth minerals, America can't function. On April 4th, just 2 days after the tariffs were announced, Beijing responded, not with anger, but with surgical precision. It halted exports of 6 heavy rare earth elements. These elements are not optional. They are absolutely vital to U.S. defense systems, electric vehicles, and high-tech manufacturing. Overnight, the global market for these minerals dried up. By mid-May, the consequences were impossible to ignore. Ford was forced to shut down a production line temporarily. GM and Stellantis, 2 other major auto manufacturers, reported major delays in their electric vehicle divisions. According to Bloomberg, U.S. industrial production suffered its worst decline since the 2020 pandemic recovery, dropping between 1.4% and 4% in May. Meanwhile, the Producer Price Index surged 3.1% year over year, driven primarily by the shortage of raw materials. Behind closed doors, frustration was growing. Kevin Hassett, director of the National Economic Council, openly admitted, "We want the rare earths to flow just as they did before April, but there's no signed deal, only a phone call and a staged photo." If Trump promised a win, why was he now pleading to get back the very resources he forced out? China controls over 90% of global rare earth production. After April's suspension, the United States was left with no way to fill the gap. There simply are no real substitutes for these materials. Components like neodymium iron-boron magnets are essential. They power jet engines, missile guidance systems, electric motors, and smartphones. Almost all of them come from China. The Wall Street Journal reported that by late May, Boeing was already experiencing component delays, which directly affected at least 2 critical weapons systems. Even the Pentagon quietly sounded the alarm, warning of serious operational risks if the rare earth shortage continued. Commerce Secretary Howard Lutnick, during emergency talks in London, confirmed on Fox Business that America has no industrial-scale alternative. Meanwhile, Chinese Vice Premier Ha Lifeng issued only 3 export licenses to U.S. companies, and only after personal requests from General Motors, Ford, and Lockheed Martin. This wasn't supply chain resilience. This was survival by negotiation. Every shipment now depended on licenses governed not by market rules, but by Beijing's shifting interpretation of national security. While Trump kept repeating the word deal 4 times in one televised clip, China never once confirmed that any such deal existed. For China, silence itself was leverage. In response to U.S. tariffs and new export restrictions targeting Huawei's AI chip production, China didn't escalate with more tariffs. Instead, it hit America, where it hurt most rare earth exports. Beijing created a licensing regime where every shipment needed a national security review. Reuters reported that since the April 4th cutoff, only 5 global export licenses had been granted, 3 of them going to U.S. defense contractors and only after intense diplomatic negotiations. This squeeze caused rare earth magnet prices to spike 27% in May, according to Benchmark Mineral Intelligence. China's strategy was not about empty threats or public bluster. It was about creating real, painful bottlenecks. Without firing a shot, Beijing simply paused the one thing the U.S. needed most and let the pressure build. Former U.S. Ambassador to China, Gary Locke, summed it up best. We handed Beijing leverage, and now they're using it with quiet precision. The terrifying question now is, what happens if China tightens its grip even more in the next quarter? Trump imposed tariffs without first ensuring that America had enough critical reserves to survive such a move, and it didn't. According to the U.S. Geological Survey, America imports 78% of its neodymium and an astonishing 98% of its dysprosium from China. Worse yet, the U.S. has no domestic refining capacity for heavy rare earths at any meaningful scale. A classified Pentagon memo obtained by Bloomberg in early June warned that the U.S. defense industrial base remains extremely vulnerable to long-term disruptions in rare earth supply. Manufacturers scrambled to find emergency solutions. Tesla redirected some of its supply to Malaysia, but at a 32% price increase. Ford spent $12 million airshipping rare earth materials from Australia, using emergency flight routes, and that extra cost was passed directly onto American consumers. Economists at HSBC now estimate that the rare earth shortage alone could shave 0.6% off U.S. GDP by the third quarter if no resolution is reached. According to the Wall Street Journal, 64% of small U.S. manufacturers reported raw material shortages in May. But instead of using this time to create alternatives, the administration relied on political theater, first announcing aggressive tariffs, then picking up the phone days later to call China and walk them back. What's left behind isn't a strategy. It's desperation. It has now turned into a desperate scramble to fix the very problem that this policy set into motion. Trump proudly referred to the May 11th Geneva Truce as a complete reset, confidently promoting the 90-day suspension of tariffs and signaling forward momentum toward a much larger and comprehensive agreement. However, within a mere 48 hours, the optimism was shaken when his own Commerce Department issued fresh warnings to international firms. They cautioned that Huawei's Ascent AI chips might still violate U.S. export regulations, casting immediate doubt on the stability of the truce. In response, China's Ministry of Commerce rejected the so-called reset, dismissing it as nothing more than unilateral grandstanding by the U.S. They accused Washington of breaking trust and further escalating tensions by relying on regulatory actions instead of genuine negotiation. According to Bloomberg, rare earth prices surged by 19% in just the following week, reflecting how fragile the situation had become. Simultaneously, the Hang Tech Index fell by 5.4% as investors grew increasingly nervous about the risk of a renewed economic decoupling between the two superpowers. In an attempt to clarify China's position, Vice Premier Helifeng announced that export licenses would continue to be processed, but now strictly based on national security considerations, meaning approvals would be handled case by case. On the other side, U.S. Trade Representative Jamieson Greer accused Beijing of deliberately managing scarcity to use it as leverage in ongoing trade talks. With no enforcement clauses formally agreed upon, what had initially appeared to be a handshake-driven reset rapidly deteriorated into a tense standoff. This growing mutual distrust is now being directly factored into global supply chains, impacting industries and businesses by the hour. Let's take a moment to check the current scoreboard. Who is actually coming out ahead, and who is absorbing the costs? In May 2025, China's trade surplus with the United States climbed to $43.1 billion, rising from $41.1 billion in the previous month, despite persistent mineral shortages and the halt in various tech exchanges. Meanwhile, U.S. companies started to feel the pressure. Ford revised its second quarter earnings forecast downward by 11.2%. After admitting to delays in electric vehicle assembly lines, all due to rare earth magnet shortages. Boeing, too, flagged concerns in its June 5th SEC filing, warning of classified program interruptions caused by supply chain constraints involving neodymium-based alloys. The ISM Manufacturing Purchasing Managers Index fell further to 47.2, marking the third straight month of contraction. This is a strong indicator of mounting stress within the manufacturing sector. HSBC analysts projected that continued disruptions in rare earth supplies could shave off as much as 0.6% from the U.S. GDP if licensing delays drag on past July. The NFIB survey painted a similarly grim picture, showing that 64% of small manufacturers were already experiencing critical material shortages, while 42% anticipated these problems would worsen in the coming months. Meanwhile, the Chinese government approved just 3 new rare earth export licenses, each directly influenced by extensive lobbying from major American automakers desperate to keep production lines running. If we measure the conflict as trade surpluses versus factory shutdowns, the battle is still far from finished. Yet quietly, the real battleground has shifted to the licensing offices deep inside Beijing's government ministries. Tensions didn't stop at trade and manufacturing. On May 28th, Secretary of State Marco Rubio announced broad new visa restrictions targeting Chinese students, labeling them national security risks. He pledged stricter screening procedures for all STEM, that is, science, technology, engineering, and math, academic visas moving forward. In response, China's foreign ministry condemned the measures, accusing the U.S. of engaging in academic isolationism and warning that retaliatory actions targeting American universities were being prepared. According to ICF Monitor data, Chinese student visa approvals declined by 18.6% year-over-year in April. In addition, at least 14 visiting scholars from China had their visa renewals denied in May at some of America's leading research institutions. Meanwhile, the U.S. Commerce Department further expanded its enforcement actions related to Huawei, declaring that even third-party companies using components developed from U.S. technology could now face penalties. This dramatic escalation led 4 European companies to suspend their joint AI development projects with Chinese partners, according to Reuters. Furthermore, the Wall Street Journal reported that Stanford University's Quantum Research Center was forced to pause 2 major collaborative research grants because of ongoing licensing uncertainties. The full extent of the damage isn't always visible on the surface or in daily headlines, but the consequences are deep and structural. Long-standing educational and technological partnerships are slowly being dismantled, and once these relationships are broken, they will be extremely difficult, if not impossible, to rebuild quickly. Looking ahead, the 90-day Geneva tariff suspension is set to expire on August 9th. With no formal deal signed, a full reversion to previous tariff levels now seems, well, increasingly likely. Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent openly admitted during an interview on CNBC that enforcement provisions have yet to be finalized. Similarly, Commerce Secretary Howard Lutnick confirmed that, as of June 7th, only 3 rare earth export licenses had been approved, and all were narrowly tailored to support automotive suppliers. According to projections from the U.S. Chamber of Commerce, reinstating the steep 145% tariffs could cost American importers as much as $18.2 billion during the fourth quarter alone. Meanwhile, the American Automotive Policy Council issued warnings that tightening magnet supplies could cause production delays, ranging from 6 to 9 weeks for major automakers such as Ford, GM, and Stellantis, if rare earth supply chains tighten further. China's Vice Premier He Lifeng has not yet committed to extending the export license beyond the current 90-day period. Instead, he simply states that specific conditions must be satisfied before any increase in export volumes can be considered. This vague stance keeps the entire global market on edge. In the meantime, global shipping costs have surged by 14% since early May. This spike is mainly driven by the need to reroute orders and by companies hoarding rare earth materials in anticipation of possible future shortages. The Drewry Maritime Index, which tracks global shipping prices, confirms this growing pressure on global trade routes. As August rapidly approaches, there is still no clear enforcement framework in place. Each informal handshake agreement is being overtaken by hard deadlines that are creeping closer by the day. Industry insiders fully understand how precarious the situation has become. Every day without a firm deal increases the uncertainty that businesses must navigate. In public, President Trump projects confidence. He describes the ongoing trade talks as productive and assures the public that rare earth supplies have been restored. But behind closed doors, the reality is far different. Since May, China has authorized only 5 rare earth shipments. Each shipment has been subjected to strict inspections and tied to detailed reports outlining the exact intended end use of the materials. Every shipment must now declare whether the materials are for commercial or defense purposes, adding layers of complexity and scrutiny to the process. The Wall Street Journal has revealed that China's new licensing system evaluates each import request carefully. If a U.S. company's contract has any connection to the defense sector, it often faces significant delays or outright rejection. This targeted approach allows Beijing to selectively tighten the screws on industries that are critical to national security, without entirely cutting off civilian industries that might be less politically sensitive. At the same time, the tentative Geneva agreement between the two countries remains extremely fragile. It lacks any binding enforcement mechanism and is set to expire in just 60 days. Both Washington and Beijing have accused one another of selectively following the terms of the agreement, creating further instability. If the tariffs are reimposed after the agreement expires, experts at Oxford Economics project that the U.S. economy could shrink by 0.9% by year's end. This potential hit would stem from a combination of escalating prices, disrupted supply chains, and slowed industrial output. What President Trump has labeled a deal is, in reality, more of an unofficial ceasefire, one that offers no guarantees or real stability. China holds the power to revoke it at any moment, while the U.S. finds itself struggling to respond effectively. Trump's ambition was to assert dominance in the trade relationship, but what has actually been revealed is America's growing vulnerability. This dependence is now laid bare through repeated licensing delays, unpredictable supply outages, and Beijing's careful, calculated management of the entire situation. And rare earth elements were just the opening move. Now, China is methodically preparing for a much deeper form of decoupling from the U.S. economy. This strategy includes developing digital currency systems designed to reduce dependence on the U.S. dollar, expanding South-South trade partnerships with emerging economies, and forging raw material alliances that are completely outside of America's influence. Each of these steps further strengthens Beijing's long-term position. Meanwhile, as Washington maintains its public narrative that a deal is in place, factories, research laboratories, and defense contractors across the U.S. are scrambling to locate alternative suppliers for critical materials. Alternatives that simply do not exist on a meaningful scale. The fast-approaching August deadline is not merely another trade milestone. It is a real-world test of America's economic resilience under pressure. So while this may look like a fresh start on the surface, don't be fooled. Pay close attention because Beijing still holds cards it hasn't played yet. We hope you're finding this video informative. Please make sure to like and subscribe, and don't forget to check out the next video now appearing on your screen.